She didn't see the boot coming, only the blur of a shoe, the thud against her ribs, and the sudden shock that stole her breath. The hallway around her seemed to freeze, every locker, every fluorescent light, every face turning into a silent accusation as she folded slightly from the hit. They hadn't even waited for her to finish her sentence. She had barely said that single, harmless truth. Her mother had been a Navy SEAL. A truth they called a joke, a truth they punished her for saying. Amelia Price steadied herself with a hand against the cold steel lockers, fighting the instinct to curl inward. She tasted metal, fear, anger, humiliation lingering on her tongue. The crowd wasn't loud. It was the quiet that made the air dangerous. A silence heavy with disbelief, with the smug expectation that she would cry or run or tremble. But she didn't give them any of that. Not yet. The ringleader, Cole Maddox, stood close enough that she could feel the heat of his breath, though his expression remained disturbingly calm. He always hid behind silence, cool, calculated, the kind that never needed volume to hurt. His friends shifted behind him, their laughter suppressed but vibrating in their throats. Amelia saw pity in a few eyes, but none stepped forward. Not one. Your mom, a SEAL. Cole tilted his head slightly, almost curious, almost studying the bruise blooming beneath her shirt. Don't lie to get attention. A tremor rippled through her chest. Not from fear, fear had long ago burned off, but from the memory of her mother's voice, the quiet strength that shaped every word she ever spoke. Her mother never bragged, never boasted. She had carried the weight of years in the shadows, the kind of service that left scars no one could see. Amelia had spent so long learning to honor that silence, to protect her mother's past from trivial gossip. She had only shared it because someone asked why she walked with such discipline, why she never flinched, why she seemed older than her age. She never expected it to be a trigger for cruelty. Cole lifted a hand as if preparing to push her again, and the hallway tightened around her like lungs refusing to inhale. The students weren't watching a bullying scene. They were watching a test. Would she break? Would she fight? Would she fold like they silently hoped she would? But a vibration shivered through the air, a sudden shift, a presence entering the far end of the corridor that none of the students noticed at first. Amelia felt it before she saw it, an instinctive recognition that prickled across her skin. Her mother walked with the kind of quiet authority that made ceilings feel lower and walls seem narrower. She moved without hurry, yet the rhythm of her steps echoed with unspoken warning. She wore civilian clothes, her hair tied back simply, her expression unreadable. She didn't need a uniform to command a room. The moment Amelia's mother saw her daughter pinned against the lockers, something ancient and controlled flickered behind her eyes. Not rage, not panic, but pure, sharpened calculation. It was the look of someone trained to assess threats in a fraction of a heartbeat. And that was the moment Cole turned. He only needed a single glance to understand he had misjudged everything. Her presence flooded the hallway with a pressure so real it felt like gravity had doubled. The students stiffened, some instinctively straightened their posture. Others stepped aside without knowing why. Cole, whose smirk had survived every confrontation he'd ever started, felt the edges of it falter. Amelia's mother stopped only a few feet away, her gaze moving from her daughter to the ring of boys around her, to the bruise beginning to form near Amelia's ribs. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence that fell next was colder than the hit Amelia had taken. Colder than the tile beneath her palms, colder than the air before a storm breaks, and in that silence every student felt it. This woman was not someone to lie about. This woman was not someone to mock. This woman was not someone to underestimate. For the first time, Cole swallowed hard, realizing that the girl he had kicked wasn't just some quiet outsider he could push around. She was the daughter of a legend, and the legend had just arrived. Amelia didn't move at first. She stayed where she was, one hand still braced against the lockers, as if letting the moment steady itself before she re-entered it. Her mother's presence changed the oxygen in the hallway, made every breath sharper, clearer, as though the air itself knew it was being watched by someone who once survived deserts, oceans, and war zones without flinching. Cole shifted his weight subtly, a movement so small most students wouldn't have noticed it. But Amelia's mother noticed everything. Her eyes dark, still, and impossibly alert, tracked every twitch, every heartbeat of hesitation. She didn't raise her chin or step forward aggressively. She simply existed in the space with a level of control so complete that it forced everyone else to question their own posture. Her gaze lowered briefly to Amelia's side, noting the spot where pain was radiating beneath her shirt. The bruise was still forming, but a mother always knew, a former seal always measured. Then her attention returned to Cole. He had no idea why his palms suddenly felt damp. His instinct told him to defend himself, to speak, to explain that it wasn't what it looked like, but his voice wouldn't rise. Something in her eyes silenced him, something that whispered she had seen boys like him in places far more dangerous than any school hallway. She had seen the type who thought power came from being surrounded by others. She had seen how quickly that illusion shattered when faced with someone who didn't need an audience to be strong. Amelia watched her mother with a strange blend of awe and guilt. She never wanted her to see this, never wanted her to see the cruelty, the disbelief, the way her classmates had thrown her truth back at her with violence. Amelia had spent years trying to protect her mother's story, to keep her heroic past from becoming some cheap rumor or badge of rebellion. And now, after one careless moment of honesty, that secret felt exposed and tarnished. But her mother wasn't ashamed, not even a flicker of it. She took one slow step forward. It wasn't threatening, it was precise, calculated. The kind of step that spoke of a lifetime of moving deliberately, each footfall grounded in purpose. Cole's friends instinctively backed up, not because she glared, not because she raised her voice, but because something ancient in their instincts recognized a predator who didn't need to bare teeth to be feared. "Did you hit my daughter?" she asked, though her tone was more observation than accusation. It wasn't loud, it didn't echo. It was the kind of question that invited truth without offering shelter from it. Cole's throat tightened. He looked around the hallway for support, but his friends were suddenly fascinated by the lockers, by the floor, by anything that didn't involve meeting the woman's gaze. Even the few students who normally recorded everything on their phones kept their hands frozen at their sides. Amelia felt the weight of the question too. Her mother's voice carried a strange softness, a soft pressure like a hand on a trembling shoulder, gentle but immovable. It made her want to step forward and say something, to shield her mother from the ugliness of the moment. But the truth was already expanding in the silence, filling the hallway like rising smoke. Cole inhaled sharply, searching for the version of himself he had built in front of these students, the untouchable one, the confident one, the one who made others shrink just by walking toward them. But that version seemed flimsy now. A paper, thin mask wilting under the gaze of someone who had stared down men twice his size without blinking. He opened his mouth to speak, but his voice cracked into an uncertain whisper he barely recognized. I mean, she was lying. The word lying felt like a spark in cold air, not because of its cruelty, but because of the way Amelia's mother reacted to it. She didn't flare with anger. She didn't correct him with a sharp rebuke. Instead, a deep, controlled breath passed through her, so quiet that only those closest caught the subtle rise and fall of her shoulders. It was the breath of a woman choosing discipline over destruction. Amelia knew what that breath meant. It meant her mother was containing something powerful, something old and dangerous that she had spent years learning to cage. Not violence, conviction, a conviction built from sacrifice, from the weight of friends lost, missions survived, and memories too heavy to speak aloud. And when she finally exhaled, the hallway seemed to steady beneath the soundless resolve in her voice. "My daughter doesn't lie about me. The words were soft, too soft, soft enough to frighten everyone. Because truth spoken that quietly was far more terrifying than anger ever could be." Cole took another step back, this time without meaning to. And that was when her mother finally moved past him, her attention fixed solely on Amelia. The crowd parted instinctively, as though a tide were retreating, as though something unstoppable were simply passing through. Amelia's breath trembled as her mother approached, not from fear, but from the ache of being seen. Truly seen. Her mother wasn't looking at the bruise, at the crowd, or at the boy who'd tried to defend his cruelty with a lie. She was looking into her daughter with the kind of stillness that made everything else, every whisper, every judgment, disappear. There was no dramatic embrace, no display of emotion. Just a quiet study, as if Amelia's mother were reading each expression, measuring each fracture in her daughter's composure with the same precision she once used to map escape routes and threat patterns. She lifted a hand, and though the gesture was small, the whole way seemed to hold its breath. Her palm brushed Amelia's cheek, warm and grounding. Amelia didn't realize she was shaking until that touch steadied her. It was then that the hallway doors behind them swung open. Principal Warren, alerted by messages passed from student to student, entered with the hurried steps of someone expecting to break up some chaotic teenage argument. But the moment he saw Amelia's mother, saw the rigid silence in the hallway, saw the fear etched into Cole's posture, he slowed, as though he had walked into a world that was not built for him. In that instant, Amelia's mother stepped slightly aside, giving him a clearer view of the situation. She never looked directly at him, but her controlled stillness spoke volumes. It wasn't a demand for authority. It was a reminder that true authority wasn't always loud. Principal Warren cleared his throat, but the sound felt too bold for the moment. He attempted to speak, but his voice wavered with uncertainty, and he settled for a simple question: what exactly happened here? No one answered immediately. Cole's friends avoided eye contact, each silently hoping someone else would speak first. Some of the students, who had been eager spectators minutes ago, now shifted uncomfortably, as though the truth had suddenly become heavier than they expected. Amelia considered speaking, but her mother gently placed a hand on her forearm, not to silence her, but to give her a moment. Amelia's words, if spoken too quickly, might crack beneath the weight of her emotions. Her mother knew that. She always did, so Amelia breathed, slow, controlled, letting the tension rise, crest, and settle inside her. "I told them about you," she finally said, her voice quiet but clear. It carried none of the hesitation she had felt before. "I told them who you were." The principal blinked, unsure why that mattered. Amelia continued before anyone else could twist her meaning. "They laughed. They said I made it up. And when I didn't take it back, he kicked me." A ripple moved through the students' guilt, fear, shame. Some swallowed hard. Others looked at Cole with sudden disappointment, as if realizing only now that they had allowed something cruel to happen right in front of them. Cole's chest rose with shallow breaths. He wasn't staring at Amelia anymore. His eyes were fixed on her mother, on the calm set of her shoulders, on the unwavering strength she carried like armor. She didn't posture, she didn't loom, she simply waited. Principal Warren's gaze shifted between Amelia, the bruise hidden beneath her shirt, and the boy who suddenly looked much younger than his reputation suggested. He opened his mouth to ask more questions, but Amelia's mother finally spoke, her voice cutting through the air with quiet precision. "I'm not interested in watching another adult debate whether my daughter deserves safety." The principal froze. Her tone wasn't confrontational. It was weary, profoundly weary. The kind of exhaustion that didn't come from one incident, but from a lifetime of watching people in power choose convenience over courage. Her words didn't accuse the principal. They challenged the hallway itself. The culture, the silence, the excuses that had made Amelia a target long before this moment. Cole took another involuntary step back, bumping into the lockers. His breath hitched as her mother turned toward him fully, not in rage but in study. She saw the fear in him, but she also saw something deeper, confusion. He didn't understand why he felt small. He didn't understand why this woman, standing so calmly, terrified him more than any teacher, coach, or parent ever had. She looked at him as someone who had once seen real monsters, men with weapons, with rage, with no mercy. And she saw instantly that Cole Maddox was not one of them. He was not dangerous. He was not powerful. He was a boy playing at cruelty because no one had ever shown him the cost of it. Her voice reached him with a softness that cut deeper than anger ever could. You didn't need to hurt her to feel strong. His face drained of color, because in that moment, for the first time, Cole realized that strength wasn't something you provoked out of fear. It was something you earned through truth, discipline, and responsibility, things Amelia carried effortlessly, things he had mocked. Amelia's mother stepped back beside her daughter, placing herself at her side, not in front of her. Not shielding, standing with. The message was unmistakable. This wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. And truth, delivered quietly, could dismantle a bully more completely than any shout. The hallway had shifted from a battleground into something strangely sacred. Silent, heavy, expectant. Amelia's mother stood with a poise that didn't need to display strength, because it was strength. Not the loud, theatrical kind people used to mask insecurity, but the quiet, lived kind forged through nights in hostile terrain and mornings spent stitching her own wounds shut. Principal Warren tried to regain control of the moment, though his voice emerged with the tentative tone of a man stepping into water he did not know the depth of. "We'll address this appropriately," he said, but his words felt small, almost fragile, compared to the moral weight hanging in the air. Her mother didn't look at him. She kept her gaze on Amelia, not checking for injury anymore, but checking for something deeper. Would her daughter retreat into herself, shut down, or would she rise? Amelia lifted her chin, not defiantly. Not dramatically, just enough to show she refused to be defined by a blow or a lie. Cole stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. The girl he had mocked for telling the truth now stood taller than he had ever realized, taller even than he felt capable of being. Something unfamiliar twisted inside him, something he had avoided for years because it required honesty. Shame. He opened his mouth, and though the word scraped its way out, it emerged real. I'm sorry. He didn't say it to escape punishment. He said it because her mother's presence had stripped away every layer of bravado he'd hidden behind. It wasn't fear that made him apologize. It was the realization that he had dishonored something sacred. He had ridiculed a woman who had risked everything so people like him could grow up in a world safe enough to be cruel within. The apology didn't change the bruise on Amelia's side. It didn't erase the humiliation, the disbelief, the crowd's muteness. But Amelia met his gaze anyway, not with superiority, but with something far more difficult, understanding. "He didn't believe me," she said quietly to her mother, but loud enough that the hallway could hear. "They all thought I was pretending." Her mother's eyes softened in a way the students hadn't expected. There was no pride in them, no need to assert her identity. Only a quiet ache, the kind that had followed her through countless silent homecomings, where she carried medals in drawers instead of displaying them. "That's the burden of truth," her mother replied, her voice low but certain. "People doubt it when they've never had to live with it." Another silence fell, but it wasn't hostile this time. It was reflective, a silence of young minds realizing they had been careless with things they didn't understand. Principal Warren finally tried again, gentler now. "We'll make sure this never happens to her again." Her mother's gaze flicked to him, steady, unreadable, and for a moment he seemed to brace himself. But instead of the reprimand he expected, she simply nodded once, a gesture that held neither approval nor forgiveness, just acknowledgement. The responsibility was now his to prove. The crowd slowly dispersed, each step leaving behind a residue of shame, respect, or confusion. Some students exchanged stiff glances, others whispered uncertainly, and a few lingered, watching Amelia with newfound caution. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't a mystery to speculate about. She was the daughter of a woman whose quiet presence had shifted the gravity of an entire room. When the hallway thinned enough that voices could be heard again without echoing, Amelia finally looked up at her mother fully. A question trembled there, one she'd carried for years, unspoken and heavy. "Is it okay that I told them?" she asked. Her mother's expression didn't change dramatically, but something softened around the corners of her eyes. She lifted a hand, brushing a strand of hair behind Amelia's ear with tender precision. "You told the truth," she answered softly. "It's never wrong to honor where you come from." Amelia breathed out, a long, quiet release of tension she hadn't realized she was holding. It wasn't permission she had needed, it was reassurance. The confirmation that she hadn't betrayed a sacred silence, but had instead defended it. Together they began walking toward the exit. Each step Amelia took felt lighter than the last, as though the bruise on her side was merely an echo of something already healing. She sensed more eyes on her, but for once they didn't sting, they didn't shrink her. Her mother walked beside her, not behind her, not ahead, matching her stride. And in that small, powerful symmetry, Amelia understood something she hadn't fully grasped until now. Strength wasn't the absence of pain or fear. It was the decision to rise with both. Behind them, Cole stood alone, still watching. Something had changed in him, a thin crack in the armor he'd once believed was inseparable from his identity. He didn't know it yet, but this moment, this single confrontation with quiet truth, would follow him for years. A reminder that respect is earned not through dominance, but through humility. As the front doors closed behind Amelia and her mother, sunlight spilled across them, warm and weightless. The world outside didn't know what had happened in that hallway. It didn't know the tension, the cruelty, the victory that came without violence. But Amelia knew, her mother knew, and for the first time in her life, the truth didn't feel like a burden or a secret. It felt like a lineage, a quiet legacy carried in her spine, in her breath, in the unshakable presence of the woman walking beside her, the daughter of a Navy SEAL, a girl who refused to bend, a truth no one would ever again dare to doubt.